Now it's time to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Megan Shapiro, who works as a survey technician aboard the NOAA ship Oscar Dyson. She's going to share how she assists with fisheries research, operates monitoring equipment and instruments, records data, assists with deploying research equipment, and more. And so if you're interested in a future job where you get to spend time at sea, conducting research, troubleshooting equipment and instruments, be sure to listen up and ask Megan all of your burning questions. So Megan, go ahead and start your video, share your screen, and then begin your presentation.
Thank you. Okay, here we go. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan, and I'm currently a senior survey technician for NOAA on board one of their research vessels called the Oscar Dyson. And before I get into talking about that, I wanted to take you guys through a timeline of my career and share with you guys how I got to where I am today. So it all began in 2012 when I started my freshman year at UNC Wilmington in North Carolina, where I studied marine biology. And I left this timeline open because there's so much more that I want to do in this field because it's so fun and there's endless opportunities. So after I started my freshman year, I got my first internship in the field, which just made me the happiest person on earth because I knew immediately that this is what I wanted to do, what I was born to do. And I worked for a little environmental agency called the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies. And I worked on a humpback whale research team. And so I got to go out on whale watches and educate the public about what we were seeing, as well as collect data on each individual animal that we were seeing out there. So I was collecting data on what the animals were doing, if there were other animals interacting with those individuals. And I also learned how to identify each individual whale from other whales that we saw. So if you look at the picture in the middle, that's a whale called Dyad. She's very special to me because she's the first whale that I ever identified by myself in the wild. And you can tell that it's Dyad because of those two dark lines on the right side of her fluke or tail. And each humpback whale has their own specific pattern on the back of their tail, and it's very specific to that individual. So it's kind of like a human fingerprint. And so I learned how to do that, and that these skills that I learned in this internship really helped me in future jobs and internships that I had. So I went back to college after that summer internship, and then I studied abroad in Fiji. And so for those of you who don't know where Fiji is, I wanted to zoom in on the map. So here's the US, here's Oregon, Washington, and Fiji is in the South Pacific. It's this tiny little island country right here. Oops. And where'd it go? Here it is. This little town called Suva. So I took some classes there at a college, and I ended up meeting a guy who was getting his master's degree, and he needed help with his his bonnet head shark project. So I was able to volunteer for him a few times a week, and we would take out this little small research vessel on the left here, and we would be out fishing for shark pups at night, where we would catch them with a net seen on the right, and we would collect a bunch of data on each shark that we caught. We would measure them, weigh them, take skin samples, and then we would let them go back into the water. And then after my 6 months in Fiji was up, I wasn't ready to go back to the US. So I started, Googling whale swimming places in a country called Tonga, which I'll show you guys where that is. So I'll zoom back out on the map and we'll get our bearings again. So here's the US and Australia, and here's New Zealand. And Tonga is smaller than Fiji. Here it is. And this is the main island down here, but I was living up in this northern island chain called Vavau. And I lived on a tiny little island called Mo'unu Island. Here it is. And it takes 7 minutes to walk around the entire perimeter of this island. And I found it because I was, just on Google, and I found this family who lives on that island, and they take people out to swim with whales every day. And so I shot them an email, and, I wanted to get involved with what they do. And so I helped them on their boat, and I also got in touch with someone from a tiny environmental protection agency in the country. They had just started their company, and I, told them that I have a few skills working with humpback whales, and I ended up helping them build a photo ID catalog so they could start to try to track each individual whale that was coming back to those islands every year. And they could see if individual whales were coming back with certain, scars or scrapes on their body, and they could try to start to get a general idea of how many whales were coming back each year to those islands. And then I went back to college after I was in Tonga, and I graduated. And then I moved right to a town in Alaska called Seward, because I knew that when I graduated from college, that it would be the perfect timing for the whales to be up in Alaska. And so I'll show you guys where Seward is on the map. I'll zoom out. And up here in Alaska, zoom into this town called Seward right here. And I found a company that took people out on boats, and they explored all of these little fjords, and these are all glaciers. And so I worked as a naturalist on board those boats, and also as a deckhand. So I was able to continue educating the public on conservation and environmental subjects. And I also learned a lot more about working on a boat in general and handling lines, which was really valuable to learn. If you want to be in this field and you want experience in the field, you have to, learn how to handle lines and work on a boat. So that was really good experience. So I did this for a few months over the summer. And then I decided to move to New Zealand. And I knew there was a lot of good, marine biology down there. And I got on Google again and started emailing certain scientists from certain universities and introduced myself and told them, my experience and what I want to do. And somehow, I, through all this communication, got connected with a few PhD students who were looking for volunteer field assistants on their projects. So I worked in 2 different areas in New Zealand with these scientists. And the first project I worked on was with Hector dolphins, which are next to the vaquita. They're the smallest marine mammal in the world. And they're very endangered. And they also are endemic to New Zealand, which means that they only live in New Zealand. And so I worked in this town called Akaroa on the South Island of New Zealand, and it's on Banks Peninsula, which is this piece of land right here that kind of sticks out into the ocean. And this area in New Zealand is known to be a hotspot for Hector's dolphins. So this is where a lot of their research goes on for these specific animals. And the project that I was working on was not only photo identification, but we were working from a small research boat, and we were using sonar to map the sea floor of this entire peninsula, because the student who I was working for, he was trying to figure out why these dolphins preferred certain bays than other bays. So while we were, exploring all of these bays around the whole peninsula, we were looking, counting how many dolphins we saw in each bay. And at the same time, we were using a sonar instrument on the bottom of the boat to map out the seafloor below us. So we were trying to figure out why certain dolphins preferred certain bays and trying to figure out like the physical features of the seafloor. And then I also worked on a project up in Kaikoura, and this is where the sperm whales were. And this is some of my favorite work that I've ever done. There's these really deep water canyons right next to shore, which is pretty unique. And we, we're able to see all of these really deep water species so close to land, just like that's what sperm whales are, deep water species. And so I learned how to track them via directional hydrophone, which is the photo in the middle. That's a hydrophone, and I'm listening to the sperm whales that are underneath us echolocating. So with that hydrophone, we were able to estimate how far away they were and generally the area of where they were in reference to the boat, so that when they surfaced, we were close enough to them that we could drive over to them and take their photo for identification. And we were collecting skin samples and also their scat to analyze it back in the lab and try to figure out what they were eating and get an idea of their overall health. And so after I was in New Zealand, I ended up going back to Alaska for a season and worked on the whale watch and glacier tours again. And then I decided that I was kind of burnt out of working in tourism. I had so much fun and I learned a lot working in tourism, but I wanted to move more towards a research and science-based job. So I applied to NOAA and I got a job on the NOAA ship Fairweather. And that ship primarily does seafloor mapping. And I think that the main reason I got this job is because of that a little bit of experience that I had in New Zealand doing habitat mapping with sonar, because this job, we were using the same kind of equipment. We were using sonar and other types of scientific equipment to map the seafloor. And I had so much fun doing this job. We operated in Alaska. We mapped the seafloor everywhere between the Pacific Northwest and the Arctic, and I learned so much. And then after a little over a year of working on this ship as a survey technician, there was an opening on the Oscar Dyson, which is where I work today. And the Oscar Dyson focuses on very different projects than the Fairweather does. It's way more animal and biology based, which is what I'm way more passionate about. But now I get to work on so many different kinds of projects. We take out a lot of different scientists out on the ship, so they are able to collect the data that they need for their own individual projects. And I get to help them and work side by side with them. I'm able to learn so much about all these studies that are going on around Alaska, and that ranges from tiny little plankton studies, which is seen on the left. The left photo is called a bongo, which is a plankton net that we put over the side into the water, and we fish for plankton, and we bring it back on board and we rinse them off and take all of our samples and bring them back into the lab and process them. And we also work on larval studies, which is the picture of the microscope in the middle. And we try to identify larval species. And we also, a big part of my job is doing pollock population and distribution studies. And the whole purpose of that is to figure out how many pollock are out there each year and where they are, so that we can create laws and regulations for commercial fishermen and ensure that overfishing doesn't happen, so that the oceans don't run out of pollock. And so I operate a lot of equipment and machinery on the ship, and I run and manage all of our scientific sensors that we have, whether they're connected to the bottom of the ship and they're constantly underwater, and then some of our sensors are the tallest thing on the ship up on a very tall mast. We have wind sensors that I have to fix and manage, and make sure that we're collecting all of the highest quality data that we can be. And working on a ship, like you have your job duties, but you also have a lot of other responsibilities because you and your crew are the only ones that you have out there. So if there's a fire, we have certain crew members that are trained to be firefighters, or if something is, wrapped, like a big piece of kelp is wrapped in a propeller on the ship and we can't get it out, then we have a dive team, which is what I'm a part of, to dive down and cut the kelp away from the ship. Or maybe one of our sonars on the bottom of the ship has a bunch of barnacles growing on it, then we'll dive down and scrape all the barnacles off of our sensors. And so yeah, I get a lot of opportunities to learn a lot in so many different fields. So I'm so thankful for how much I've learned working for NOAA. There are endless learning opportunities in this organization. And now my favorite part of this presentation is my advice for all of you guys. If you're really passionate about this field or anything that you want to do, to stay determined and don't let people turn you away from pursuing your dreams. Because I personally had, a few of my peers when I first was, deciding to study marine biology in college, I had a lot of, aunts and uncles and other people that were worried because they were scared that I wouldn't be able to find a job or there wasn't enough money in the field. Well, don't listen to them and stay focused. If you're passionate about it and determined, you will make it happen. And a great way to do that, and a great way to start on your career path, is to volunteer. A lot of people who are hiring want to see that you put in work volunteering. And you just have to start at the bottom of the totem pole. You have to start somewhere. Don't be afraid if you get an offer and it's unpaid. If you are that serious about a career path, you will make it work no matter what your money situation is. Another big thing for this field is networking and getting your name out there and staying in touch with connections that you have with people. And this kind of goes into my next point, which is reading scientific journals that interest you and getting in touch with those scientists. So what I mean by that is, let's say you want to be a tiger researcher, and so get on Google, and I'm sure that your teachers can help you find peer-reviewed scientific journals and start reading about different tiger research that's going on. And if you find a study that is really interesting to you, then look at the very top of that journal, and there's a list of authors and a list of scientists that worked on this project. Start Googling their names, find their emails, write them an email, introduce yourself, tell them your background, tell them what you're interested, tell them that you love, their work, and ask them if they have any advice for you. Ask them if they take volunteers or if they need help with anything with their work, and keep in touch with them. Just make sure you get your name out there and keep in touch with people in the field. Another piece of advice I have is to build as much variety on your resume as possible. I never say no to an opportunity that comes my way, and I think that's worked out very well for me so far. Even if you aren't necessarily passionate about it, just say yes to it, because you never know if you are applying to a job and the employer is deciding between you and one other person. You could have just that one tiny little bit of experience that sets you a little bit higher than that other person, and you're gonna get the job. I am offered a lot of different kinds of trainings with my job right now, and I always say yes to them. I said yes to being forklift certified, which is so random, and I don't know if I will ever use it, but why not? And that kind of also goes into my last bullet point, and I think this is so important, is to travel and live outside of your comfort zone and make sure that you're picking up as much information from so many different types of places and people as you possibly can, because the bigger picture that you have, it will benefit you so much in the long run. And people really want to see that you can work in different kinds of environments and with different kinds of people. And the more experience you have around the world, I promise it will benefit you. Don't just stay in one place. So with that being said, are there any questions?
Thank you, Megan. What an inspirational last slide. I love it. And so so thank you for sharing your very meandering, hopefully participants are seeing from these webinars that everyone has a very different path, and it's not direct, and you literally showed us a map of you going all over the world. So it could look like that for them. So thank you for that. And so going off of one of our questions from Gabrielle is linked to what you were just saying as part of your advice. So a lot of the advice that you just gave probably answers a lot of this question, but just to kind of reiterate and then also touch on a couple of our other points. Gabrielle asks, what is the most effective way to find these internships, these volunteer opportunities? Were you just Googling, which it sounds like that you did, asking professors or advisors for advice? So you alluded to some of those things already. So I guess I'll just say, it sounds like you sought out those opportunities. Like, I want to go to Seward, so I'm going to figure out how I can do X. Is that fair? So maybe take this question that route.
Yeah, so I would say majority of, a lot of mostly the unpaid positions that I took were mainly through Googling. Like when I got the job in Seward, I literally Googled whale jobs in Alaska. And majority of the paid positions you're going to get at first are in the tourism industry, which is great. That's a great way to start. But then through that, you start meeting people. Every job that you have, you meet so many people in so many different fields. And so Googling paired with keeping in touch with people that you work with and, reading scientific journals and getting in touch with those scientists, I would say are the three like most effective ways to find internships. And if you know anyone in the field, just ask them how they started and don't be shy.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. Like the fact that you're one of our first presenters that has given the advice of reading the journals and reading the articles and getting some background information in that regard. And so I appreciate that, because I think something to reiterate what Megan is saying is that scientists like to see that you've invested in their science and that you're interested in their science. So if you can speak to them about what they're investigating, they see the passion and it speaks loudly. So thank you.
Yeah.
And so just to keep on that same line, I know we have some other questions coming in, but we have a question is, what would you suggest for someone who might be a little more introverted? It seems that we can all very quickly see, Megan, that you are extroverted and maybe not as scared, but do you have any advice for those that may be a little bit more on the introverted side?
Well, I think it definitely depends on, for introverted people, what exactly you want to do with your career. So I mean, I will say that having team working skills and interpersonal skills are very beneficial. But also a lot of people in this field are really nice and really friendly and understanding. So, I mean, introverted people, no one is like gonna necessarily like be mean to you, but if you feel more comfortable working in a lab or indoors, you could go that way, or maybe you try to seek out jobs that you're not working in a team environment. But yeah, I mean, I've worked at most of my career, I've worked with other people, but right now I work by myself most of the time. It's just myself and one other survey tech, and we work opposite shifts on the ship. And so, but it is really, really important to build interpersonal skills. I think that that's a really important skill to have, and in every field, probably.
Those are great points. And I think it's also fair to say that there are times we'll have to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. And sometimes when you do that are the most rewarding times and helps you get to where you need to go. So good points, great points.
Yeah.
How about, let's see, I'm trying to link some of these questions together. So we have a question from Sydney. You worked in tourism. And so did you ever feel like that you, and this could be tourism, education, like any kind of outward facing museum. Anytime, did you ever feel like you didn't have enough knowledge? Because it can be kind of intimidating to work with the public, and the public can ask all kinds of questions. So did you ever feel that you didn't have enough knowledge or education to kind of work in those positions?
Yeah, sometimes, especially when I first started working in, in Alaska where I had never been before, or in New Zealand where I had never been before, or in Tonga where I'd never been before. Like the beginning was a little intimidating for sure because I just wasn't experienced in those certain areas. But I knew I had enough background information on the animals themselves that I could answer most questions, but I definitely got a lot of questions that I just didn't know the answers to. And in those situations, I think the best, way to go about that is to just be honest and say, you know what, I don't know. And then, um, I'm the kind of person where like, I want to know the answer to it too. So I'll like kind of sneak away and go like read about it or talk to someone else who's working on the boat and ask them and try to learn it myself and then go back and find that person and say, hey, so I just like looked it up or I just talked to one of my coworkers and this is what they have to say. So yeah, here's the answer to whatever you were asking.
Fair. And I will say I used to volunteer at the National Aquarium in Baltimore, and I would carry around a little tablet in my back pocket and write down people's questions. And if they wanted me to contact them later, I could. Or I
Yeah.
think folks like to see effort. So if you don't know the answer, be honest that you don't know the answer, right? But then also say, well, here's where you could look, or here is where we could figure out the answer. So great points. We have a question about part of your career path when you were collecting whale scat. Someone is very curious at how you went about that. What were your methods?
So it was very tricky. So pretty much when the sperm whale would surface, they would only spend a few minutes at the surface until they would go back down and dive for about 45 minutes. And so we had to, work really quickly while the whale was at the surface. And so pretty much right after the whale went down, we would steer the boat really slowly towards where the whale was. And we would have someone at the very front of the boat with a net that had a long pole, but had really tiny mesh on it. And the scat is like bright orange and it also smells terribly. So if you couldn't see it, you could most likely smell it. And so we would just, we would have the person on the bow of the ship with the net, and they would be looking for it in the water, kind of around where the whale was. And if they saw it, then they would, say to whoever was driving the boat, 1 o'clock, 10 feet. And so we would slowly turn the boat and then with the net go and pick it up and use tweezers and grab it from the net with tweezers and put it in a little vial and screw it up and save it for later.
Sounds great. And not to put a shameless plug, but we definitely, one of our previous presenters for one of our webinars is a marine mammal ecologist. And so she talks about that. So I think it's last June, you wanna go over to our website, and if Kate can drop that link in to our website, you can learn more about that too. So thank you so much for that. And then we have a question about sonar. How far does the sonar reach at depth?
So every sonar instrument is different. I've worked with some that can reach down to 2,500 meters and some that can only reach down to like 800 meters. It really depends on what kind of sonar you're using and the certain settings that you're using on that sonar. But in New Zealand, we didn't, oh no, in New Zealand we were using, I can't remember exactly what kind of sonar we were using, but yeah, they range. There are certain sonars that are more for like shallow water, and then that can operate in like 10 feet, but then they can also go to somewhere like 2,500 meters, which is very deep. I think those are the ones that I've worked with that can ping down the deepest.
Very good. Thank you. I know we have a couple of other questions in the Q&A, but maybe while our next speaker is talking, you can jump in there. But One more final question is, you alluded to some other jobs that can be filled on a NOAA research ship, right? And so you're a survey technician, there's scientists on board. So just for those of us that may not want to be in the survey technician or the scientist realm, what other jobs could be filled on a NOAA ship?
Yeah, so there are engineers and they primarily stay down in the engine room, and I mean they do everything on the ship. They work with the engines, obviously, generators, the heating system, the air, like they work with a lot of like the mechanics on board. And there's also the deck department, which is a really fun department to work in. And they're, constantly outside. They manage the decks of the ship. They operate a lot of the equipment on board and the machinery on board. When we're doing projects that involve fishing and collecting fish samples, they'll be the fishermen on board. And they also help out on the bridge or in the wheelhouse where the ship is being steered. They will, we always have someone from the deck department that's up on the bridge and helping whoever is driving the ship to be lookouts, and sometimes they'll be on the helm or the steering wheel themselves. There's also a program called the NOAA Corps, which is a part of the uniformed military service, but they are a little bit different. I mean, they are NOAA employees, but they're technically part of the military. They don't, carry weapons or anything. But they go through boot camp with the Coast Guard, and they are kind of on a 2-year rotation. So we get new NOAA Corps officers every 2 years, and so our captain is a NOAA Corps officer. All of our mates are NOAA Corps officers, and they do all of like the logistics and the HR for the ship, and they also do all of like the navigating and most of the driving of the ship. And then we have stewards who are in charge of our meals. They cook us 3 meals a day at certain times of the day, and they also do all like the linens and laundry and sheets and bedding on the ship as well. And I think that is all of the departments. I think I touched on all of the departments. Yeah. And then there's survey, which is the smallest department on the ship.
Fantastic, Megan. And I will do another plug for, if you're interested in the NOAA Corps, we actually had someone speak last May 2020. So go to our Career Day website and learn more about the NOAA Corps, the ways to get involved in that there. So thank you, Megan, so much for your inspirational, fantastic insights, and just giving us an idea of what it's like or how you navigated to where you are today.